LSU last year surprised a lot of people year one under head coach Brian Kelly. Although this guy doesn't have a good Southern accent and he doesn't have good dance move, this guy proved that he was a really good head coach last season based on how LSU performed last year. And let's just be honest, LSU kind of overachieved last year because, be honest, if you're an LSU fan, did you really think that your team was going to make it all the way to the SEC championship game year one under Brian Kelly? There were a good amount of people who were doubting if this hire was even going to work, even though Brian Kelly has several decades of head coaching experience and he's won at the highest of levels in college football. But you look at LSU going 10-4 in 2022, and you wonder if in 2023 this year, what's going to be their encore performance? Is this a team that's capable of being able to repeat as SEC West champions and potentially winning the SEC championship this year and stamping their ticket to the college football playoffs? Now, quarterback Jaden Daniels returns. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC, one of the best quarterbacks in college football overall, and he was really fantastic last year. We talk about the performance that Bryce Young had for Alabama, how he kind of carried Alabama on his back. Jaden Daniels, in my opinion, carried LSU on his back. He led the team in rushing touchdowns and rushing yards, and that offensive line that he had blocking in front of him last year was not good at all. I mean, that was one of the worst pass blocking offensive lines in the SEC last year. And that's your biggest question going into this year if you're a fan of LSU. How improved is your offensive line going to be? If you're going to be a team that ends up beating Georgia in the SEC championship potentially, you got to be able to block up front. We saw what Jalen Carter did to this offensive line last year. He was basically a one-man wrecking crew. He ended up getting to Jaden Daniels and holding this guy up with literally one arm. So this offensive line, if this is going to be a team that's going to be capable of being able to win this conference, they got to be way better up front. Now, when you look at their wide receiving core and the talent that they have at running back, they're stacked. You have Malik Neighbors, not just one of the best wide receivers in the SEC, but one of the best wide receivers in all of college football. He potentially could be a first-round pick in next year's draft. You got tight end Mason Taylor, who was one of the best freshman tight ends in college football last year. He's definitely somebody who I have circled this year who could be a breakout player for LSU this year. And at the defensive side of the football, or on the defensive side of the football, this is one of the most talented defenses that LSU has had in recent memory. We know about the Wolverine that they have at middle linebacker in Harold Perkins. This guy is a demigod. He's like, I don't even know how to describe him, man. This guy is like half man, half machine. And then you got defensive tackle Mason Smith, one of the best interior defensive linemen in all of college football. And there's some key transfers that I really like. You got Deuce Chestnut from Syracuse. He was one of the best cornerbacks for Syracuse and one of the best cornerbacks in the ACC conference. You got Oregon State transfer linebacker Omar Speights. I watched a lot of Oregon State last year. He was probably their best defensive player last year. And then you look at the talent and depth that they have on the defensive line and that secondary. LSU's defense is good enough to slow down some of the high-powered offenses that they're going to face this season. And week one, you got your biggest test of the season right out the gate, neutral site game against Florida State. We saw how that game went last year. And LSU, they're going into this season with payback on their mind. And what makes that game very interesting is that you have two teams that have high expectations going into this year. You have two teams that many people feel could end up being able to make it to the college football playoffs and being able to kind of bring like some different flavor to the playoff conversation. LSU went to the playoffs in 2019, but it kind of seems like we forgot all about that 2019. It seems like it was a decade ago when that happened, although it happened not too long ago. And then you got Florida State, who's trying to get back to the college football playoffs, somewhere that they haven't been since the playoffs first got implemented in college football. So that's going to be one of the biggest games of the whole entire college football season. And we get it the first week of the regular season. Then you get to play Grambling State, Mississippi State. Those should be two pretty easy wins. Grambling State, I think you should pretty much roll over them. Mississippi State, no disrespect to them, but I think that should be a pretty easy game for you. So potentially, depending on the outcome of that Florida State game, you're going into that Arkansas game either 3-0 or 2-1. And then after you play Arkansas, which I think you should be able to take care of them, you got to play Ole Miss and you got to play Missouri, back-to-back games on the road. Missouri, I've been telling you guys all off season, the M in Missouri stands for mid. Missouri is not a good team. I think they are a mediocre team at best under head coach Eli Drinkwitz. They should take care of business. And then you got to play Ole Miss before you play Missouri. Ole Miss could be a little bit of a challenge for LSU this year. I think Lane Kiffin has a pretty good squad going into this year. I don't know if they're going to play a lot of defense this year. I doubt that they will, but you are going to have a team that's going to have a really good offense. Now, we don't know who's going to be starting at quarterback for Ole Miss, Spencer Sanders, Jackson Dart, or whoever, but I think that Lane Kiffin has proven more than enough that his offenses always end up being pretty good regardless who he has at quarterback. So that could be a pretty big test for LSU. Then you got to play Auburn, which I don't think Auburn is going to be a game that you just look over this year. I think Hugh Freeze is definitely going to have Auburn playing at a high level this year, especially around this time of the season. Auburn should be hitting their strides offensively under head coach Hugh Freeze. You got to play Army, which you should win that game. And then you have your bye week. And then this is where your schedule gets a little bit tough. You got to go on the road to Tuscaloosa. And you got to beat them for the second consecutive year in a row. Now, I can't remember the last time Nick Saban has lost to the same team in back-to-back years. But I know it's been a while. And it's very hard to beat Alabama at home. LSU fans, be honest with yourself. You barely beat Alabama last year. It came down to a last minute or last second 2-point conversion that ended up winning the game for you, but that was at home. Playing Alabama and Tuscaloosa is a different animal. They haven't lost in Tuscaloosa since 2019, which you guys were the one who gave them that L, and before that, they hadn't lost at home in 4 years prior to 2019, which was against Ole Miss in 2015. So if you're going to beat Alabama, you need to play not just your best football, but one of the best games that you've ever played, because that's going to be the kind of effort that it takes to beat a Nick Saban coach team in Tuscaloosa. And I don't know if LSU wins that game. I do believe that they will beat Florida State, but I don't know if they're going to beat Alabama for a second straight year in a row. But even if you lose that game, if that's your only loss, you should still be in the playoff conversation. You should still have a chance at being able to win the SEC West. It's just that you kind of won't control your own destiny. It just depends on the situation and the scenario that gets laid out. And then your final 3 games, Florida, which you should win, and then Georgia State, you should roll them, and then you got to play dreaded Texas A&M, the team that upset you last year and pretty much ended your hopes of being able to make it to the college football playoffs before you ended up having to play Georgia. And Texas A&M is going to be a really good team this year. Jimbo Fisher with the hiring of Bobby Petrino, I feel like that's going to reinvigorate that program, and I feel like Texas A&M is going to be in the conversation to win the West. You can say I'm tripping, you can call me delusional all you want to, but Texas A&M has a really talented football team, and I think that their team is just as good as LSU going into this year, and I know you LSU fans are not going to disagree with me, but I think that Texas A&M is being really slept on this year. So I think the floor for LSU this year is 9 wins, and the ceiling for LSU is 11. And of course, some of you are going to say, man, the ceiling is 12 wins, we can go undefeated. You most definitely can, but I have a hard time seeing you beating both FSU and Alabama. FSU is going to have a great team this year, and you're going to have to beat Alabama at home. One of those games you're probably going to lose. Now, maybe you could lose another game. Maybe you potentially lose to Texas A&M again, or maybe you get upset by Ole Miss. Maybe Auburn can give you an upset. But I have LSU going 10-2 this year, possibly 11-1. I think that this is one of the best teams in the SEC this year, probably the second or either the best team, either ahead of Alabama or behind of Alabama, depending on who you ask. I think they got a really good shot at winning the West. I don't know if they're going to be good enough to beat Georgia this year. I think they have the talent to give Georgia a close game. It just depends on how good that offensive line is going to be. On your defensive line, I think you're going to be able to give Georgia's offensive line some problems, because I don't think that this is going to be a defensive line that's going to get pushed around by anybody. You got a lot of NFL caliber guys on this defensive line. Mason Smith is expected to be a first-round pick in next year's draft. Harold Perkins, you saw what he did his freshman season. Imagine what he's going to be doing his second year with this program. And your secondary is absolutely loaded. So for LSU, I think they can win either 10 or 11 games. And when it comes to their chances of being able to make it to the college football playoffs, I most definitely think they got a very good shot. But I don't know if they're going to be able to beat Alabama this year. I really think if LSU has one loss, it's going to come to playing Alabama, having to play them on the road in Tuscaloosa, a place that not too many teams are able to get wins at. But let me know how you guys are feeling about LSU down in the comment section down below.